DFS.
It is Wednesday, November 24th here in Draft Shark Studios in Rochester, New York. Welcome to a special edition of the DFS podcast. I'm your host, Matt Schaff. With me, as always, is Jared Smola. And this podcast is sponsored by our partners at Fanshare Sports. Fanshare curates hundreds of pieces of daily fantasy sports-related articles, tweets, and podcasts to create the most accurate ownership projections in the industry. Those projections can be found in the lineup generator on DraftSharks.com, and you can find up-to-date ownership info anytime at fansharesports.com. Jared, we've got our usual 3-game Thanksgiving slate of NFL football this week. That means not only showdowns for us, but a short slate to play around with. So, I mean, we're going to go through this kind of normally, but the short slate always means that we talk about guys we wouldn't normally talk about a whole lot.
Yeah, and in some ways, I think there's more of an edge if you're, really doing your homework on this stuff, especially on this slate, because there are some, ugly games, some ugly situations that might be worth investing in, because it takes a lot less to be a tournament winning player on a 3-game slate. I also think swapping on this slate in particular is more important than a main slate, because you have two different opportunities to swap. After that first game, you can kind of get a lay of the land, see where you stand, and potentially swap. And then again after the second, the Dallas Vegas game, you can swap again. So don't drink too much, don't eat too much turkey, stay on your toes, and swap if needed after those first 2 games.
Yeah, just remember the tryptophan thing is a myth. So the turkey is probably not doing it. It's probably the stuff in your glass. But yeah, if you want a late swap, make sure to stay on the ball. Let's start at quarterback here, Jared. Josh Allen stands out among the guys that are available. He's easily the best fantasy QB on the slate so far, and understandably the most expensive, but he also hasn't been awesome lately. Bad against the Colts last week, bad against the Jaguars 2 weeks before. Even with in between his best PFF passing grade of the season against the Jets, he's still 25th in passing grade over the past 3 weeks among 40 quarterbacks with at least 25 dropbacks.
Yeah, there are some injury issues we're still waiting on, what we'll have later tonight. But one of them, and I think it's going under the radar, is Buffalo's right tackle, Spencer Brown. And the 3 games Allen has sucked, Miami, Jacksonville, and last week against Indy, those are the 3 games Spencer Brown has missed. I don't think it's all that. There's other factors, but he's been a big absence. So that's one I'm waiting on. And I'm going to like Allen more if he gets Spencer Brown back, and maybe consider fading Allen if Spencer Brown remains out. It is a pretty decent spot, I think, for Allen. I mean, New Orleans much, much better against the run than the pass. They're actually 25th in adjusted points allowed to quarterbacks. That's the worst among the 6 defenses playing on Thursday. So, decent spot for Allen. I do think, he has the highest ceiling among these 6 quarterbacks, and, that alone makes him obviously worth considering even at the price tag.
Saints do have a D-line capable of exploiting that weakness at right tackle if Spencer Brown's out. But they also have an injury, Marcus Davenport at defensive end to monitor. So, yeah, we'll watch all of that heading into the game. But I can't argue that Josh Allen has the highest ceiling among guys on the slate. And then, there's only 6 quarterbacks available, obviously, and I'm not playing Jared Goff, and I'm not playing Trevor Siemian against the Bills. Simeon's got the toughest QB scoring matchup by our adjusted fantasy points allowed. So that brings it down to Allen, Andy Dalton, Derek Carr, Dak Prescott. I think that my lean here is Dak Prescott overall. I mean, if you're playing some volume here, obviously you're going to get some of multiple guys. I think Dak Prescott's probably going to be my greatest lean. He's had a tough 3 weeks, kind of like Josh Allen, but with the good game in between the 2 duds. But over that same span that I mentioned for Josh Allen with PFF passing grade, Dak Prescott's 11th in that group in PFF passing grade. So he hasn't been as bad passing wise as Josh Allen lately. He gets a Vegas defense that's 23rd in defensive DVOA, a fairly neutral matchup for quarterback scoring by our adjusted fantasy points allowed. But Dak offers $900 in savings versus Josh Allen on DK. He's $900 more than Derek Carr, which isn't really that big a gap for the slate that we have overall and the prices we have to pay at the other positions. Missing Amari Cooper and CeeDee Lamb, I think on a normal slate, that would probably make me stay away from Dak. I feel like it almost adds attractiveness here, though, because Cedric Wilson's cheap at 3,500. Michael Gallup is cheap for a number 1 receiver at 5,900. And then Dalton Schultz, 5,300 is kind of expensive for him, but it fits in nicely with the tight end slate that we have here, and not a difficult price to fit in overall.
Yeah, I mean, I think Dak clearly the second best play in terms of raw projection on this slate behind Josh Allen. Interesting if you look at the implied totals. I mean, obviously Dallas and Buffalo are at top among these 6 teams, but Dallas is like way ahead of Buffalo. They're at 29.25 implied points. That's actually highest on the entire week, not just on this 3-game slate. And Buffalo's down at 25.75. So that's what has me interested in Dak. Just that, Vegas thinks Dallas is going to be the highest scoring team on this slate pretty easily. But man, missing those weapons hurts. I also think I'm interested to see what FanShare says, but I think Dak's going to be the highest owned quarterback on the slate. I think he's going to come in higher than Josh Allen because of those savings. So I think it's viable to fade the Cowboys passing game and play Zeke Elliott and Tony Pollard and just hope they go run heavy. Which I do. That'd kind of be my lean. Missing those wide receivers against a beatable Raiders run defense.
I also think on this slate, playing Dak Prescott doesn't mean that you have to stay away from the Cowboys running backs. And normally you wouldn't want to do that, but so little to choose from, that could be a way to differentiate. If Dak does come in at highest ownership, I would bet that Dak and Josh Allen are pretty close together and well ahead of the rest of the quarterbacks. But, I'll be curious to see what those numbers look like tomorrow.
Yep. Agreed. Outside of those two, I'm going to fade Derek Carr. The other guy I'm considering is Andy Dalton. For the savings, for the matchup against Detroit. Detroit's the worst pass defense among these 6 teams playing. And I think, we'll get into some of the wide receivers and tight ends, but I think Darnell Mooney is just a straight up good play regardless. And, I think we can get into it, but I think Marquise Goodwin is in play. And I think Cole Kmet is in play. So it's ugly, but it's super cheap. It's going to be low owned, and it can, you can fit in, Zeke Elliott plus Stephon Diggs if you play an Andy Dalton stack.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think part of going with Dak is that I can get exposure to those quarterbacks without having to play those quarterbacks. I agree with Andy Dalton over Derek Carr. I want to like Derek Carr as a bounce back candidate and a lower owned guy, but the Dallas defense has been strong 3 of the past 4 weeks, especially against the pass. It's 3rd in the league in pass defense DVOA now for the season and 2nd in overall weighted DVOA. So that's the Football Outsiders stat that weighs more recent games more heavily than the full season. So Dallas is playing very well on defense right now. The Raiders are not playing very well on offense, and that is not a great matchup. And I mean, even if you think Derek Carr has some rebound potential, I think you can buy that by playing Darren Waller or Hunter Renfrow.
Yeah. Carr has not been good in 3 games without Henry Ruggs. Just 7.2 yards per pass attempt. He was at 8.5 yards per pass attempt with Henry Ruggs. So that's obviously been an issue. I think that the argument in favor, if you want to play Carr, is you just hope he leads this slate in pass attempts. Vegas has been a pass leaning offense anyways. They're pretty big underdogs here, so they fall behind early. Maybe Carr throws it 42 times and ends up being the 2nd highest quarterback on the slate or something. So there's an argument for him, but Carr is not someone I'm going to get to in my lineups.
And he's certainly had a fine season overall. He's been rough lately, so we'll see if there's some rebound potential or if things are just in trouble there now. Anything else at quarterback?
Nope.
Running back, DeAndre Swift looks like the first decision here. He's coming off those 2 straight games of 130 plus rushing yards. The Pittsburgh game, though, looks like an outlier. 33 carries in that game for 130. That's the only game all year that Swift has had more than 14 rushes. Last week was back down to 14. Had the big rushing game still, so obviously he can do it on lighter volume. But he's also had just 6 total receptions for 5 total yards over the past 2 weeks. Jamal Williams is back as of last week. What are you doing with DeAndre Swift here?
Yeah, definitely in the mix for me. I mean, not a must play. I think the running back on the other side of this game is the best play at the position. But Swift's usage was still strong last week with Williams back. He played 73% of the snaps, ran a route on 80% of the pass plays. Swift got 14 of the 21 running back carries. It was 14 carries for Swift, 7 for Jamal Williams. And Swift did see 4 targets. It was a 17% target share. There wasn't much passing volume with Tim Boyle under center. It does sound like Jared Goff is going to play in this game, which is good news. He's Jared Goff, but he is a big upgrade over Tim Boyle. So that would help DeAndre Swift. I want to see too, do we know if Akeem Hicks is playing for Chicago? I know he hasn't practiced yet this week, so it's leading towards him not playing. That's been an upgrade for run offenses when Hicks is out.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't seen the latest on him, but I wouldn't bet on him playing, and I certainly wouldn't bet on him changing this matchup for DeAndre Swift just because he's been in and out of the lineup all year.
Fair.
I'll be curious to see if Jamal Williams takes more touches this week. He did. He got 7 carries to Swift's 14 last week. I don't think it's a worry, but the last time before that we saw Jamal Williams in the lineup for Detroit, he had 12. He had 12 carries to Swift's 13 against the Rams. So there's a chance he takes more work. I agree with you though. I mean, Swift is somebody I'm certainly not fading on this slate where there are so few high upside options, but I don't think he's a must play because we do have David Montgomery that you alluded to. $1,300 cheaper on DK, $500 cheaper on FanDuel is Montgomery. And he has gotten back to being a workhorse despite what Khalil Herbert did while Montgomery was out. 84% of running back carries for the Bears in the 2 games since he returned from his knee injury. All 3 of the running back targets. So we like that share of the targets. And I think Andy Dalton over Justin Fields this week is probably good for David Montgomery's target upside. Fields has targeted running backs on 12.1% of his pass attempts this year. Dalton has on 17.8%. And he had 6 running back targets in each of his 2 starts to open the season. Of course, that second of those 2 starts, he left early with an injury.
Yeah, agreed that Dalton is better for Montgomery's target projection. Montgomery played 95% of Chicago's offensive snaps last week. That's a territory very few running backs get to. Awesome matchup, obviously. Detroit 29th in Football Outsiders run D rankings, 31st in adjusted points allowed to running backs. Montgomery had a big game against Detroit back in week 4, 106 yards and 2 touchdowns. And that was the game he left early with the knee injury that knocked him out for the next few weeks. So, he would have had even bigger numbers there. So to me, Montgomery, the best play at running back, probably the best play on the entire slate. He's also probably going to be the highest owned player on the entire slate. So that's the argument to fade him. The way I play, I'll eat the chalk at running back. I'll probably have Montgomery in every lineup I make and, get different other spots.
Yeah, I think that's where you can get a little too cute at times if you fade Montgomery with any to any meaningful level here. There are only so many guys, and if he does go off in everybody else's lineup except for yours, then that takes away your chances of winning that particular contest.
Yep.
DVOA says Detroit is weak against both the run and the pass. Worst in coverage versus running backs among all of their matchups. 30th in that category. No worse than 20th against any other position. And that makes sense when you look at the Lions with a weak core of linebackers. Elsewhere at running back, I think it's not really too hard to make cases for Josh Jacobs and Zeke Elliott. I think the decision is how heavily you go into them if you're playing a bunch of lineups, but it's not hard to make the case for playing them to some degree.
Yeah, not hard to make a case. I'm probably not going to play either, though. Jacobs, I just don't like the spot for the Raiders. I don't think the offense is going to do much. Jacobs' role in the passing game has been nice, so that's kind of why you'd play him. I think he's less game script dependent than he has been in the past because he's getting that passing game usage. So he's okay. Zeke is okay. Zeke could easily score twice and be someone you need. I think I'm going to end up playing a little Tony Pollard instead of Zeke Elliott. Zeke's been dealing with the knee issue. He's on a short week now. I think you might see a bit more Pollard than we have been. And you could see some more targets go to the running backs too with these wide receiver injuries. Maybe Pollard had 7 targets 2 weeks ago. So, maybe Pollard gets 10 carries and 5 targets. He can bust off a big play. So I think that's the spot I might get different in my tournament lineups is playing Tony Pollard and fading Zeke.
Yeah, that's where the short slate gets fun. Tony Pollard wouldn't make sense other than maybe I'll take a flyer on him in a normal week, but there's definitely room for him to be involved here. 7+ carries in 8 of his 10 games this season, of course, with Zeke Elliott around for almost all that. 12+ touches in 5 of those games. So half of the games this season, he's gotten 12+ touches. So it's not a big stretch to say there's potential for Pollard to get the ball more. I agree with you that with their top 2 receivers likely out for this game, it would certainly make sense for Dallas to lean run, which we've seen them do anyway when everybody's healthy, and to give Tony Pollard a few more opportunities because he's an electric athlete when he does get the ball. So yeah, I like Tony Pollard in there. And it only further helps Pollard that there's just not a whole lot else to like here. The Bills running backs look like a total avoid to me against the Saints, who are number 1 in rushing DVOA. Bills don't want to run the ball anyway. And now there's 3 guys that you have to worry about now that Matt Breida has actually been in the mix. New Orleans, we'll see who's available for this game.
Yeah, that's probably the biggest question remaining for the slate is, I mean, I'd be surprised if Alvin Kamara plays. It seems like he suffered a setback last Wednesday because he hasn't practiced since. Didn't practice on Monday or Tuesday. Mark Ingram did not practice on Tuesday. So we'll see later today. Maybe it's just a day off for a veteran on a short week. But if Ingram plays, I'm probably going to end up fading him. Again, maybe he's banged up. He's an old guy on a short week. The usage has been good. He's basically played like Alvin Kamara's role. He has 30 carries and 15 targets over the last 2 weeks. So if you expect him to get that again, he's a fine play. I'm just not sure on the short week. Tony Jones will be a guy tough to get away from, I think, if Ingram and Kamara are out. Tony Jones is $4,000 on DraftKings, and I think he'd get the majority of the backfield work, even in a bad matchup. Just a running back on this slate getting 15 plus touches at that price tag. I think he'd be a nice play.
Yeah, we'll have to see whether I get to him. I feel like I might be just using somebody else and playing two other running backs and not playing a running back in the flex, but I can't argue against a $4,000 running back if he's leading that backfield, certainly being in the mix for consideration here. Wide receiver, Jared, what do you like?
What do I like? There's some obvious plays like Steph Diggs, I think is a big decision. He's just clearly the best wide receiver on the slate. Like you go from Diggs to Michael Gallup and Darnell Mooney, who are fine at their price, but Steph Diggs is the guy who could go for 30 and be the guy you need to have. He's $7,900 on DraftKings. The Saints are 29th in adjusted points allowed to wide receivers, but they're 14th in coverage against number one wide receivers. That's because they have Marshawn Lattimore. I think Diggs is going to see a lot of Lattimore in this game. He had a couple big games against Lattimore when he was with the Vikings, though. It's a matchup I think Diggs can win. So, to me, definitely on your Josh Allen teams, Diggs would be a must for me. And then otherwise, he has a tough fade, and he's easy enough to get into lineups, especially if you're not going to play Zeke Elliott.
Yeah, I can't argue with any of that. Marshawn Lattimore is funny. He's an up and down player. Like there will be whole seasons where he looks like a shutdown corner, and then others where it's like I remember when Marshawn Lattimore was good at football, and even this year, you talk about the Football Outsiders stats say he's been good. The PFF grades say he's been and even within those numbers, like he does better in some categories than others. I think overall, you figure that it's a tougher individual matchup for Stephon Diggs, but he's a good enough player that you're not full fading him for any cornerback unless it's somebody having a truly magical season at the position. Right. So I agree. Certainly Stephon Diggs is in the mix. I think he's probably a bit more even of a can't avoid play than DeAndre Swift at running back, but doesn't quite get to the point of I have to have him in my lineup because we've seen already with Buffalo, no matter of the matchups, the targets can just go elsewhere in a given game. But clearly the class of wide receiver this week, Darnell Mooney is there. Got a bunch of targets last week, 16, had that long catch and run touchdown after Andy Dalton entered the game. So he's going to get plenty of targets this week. Looks like no Allen Robinson again. And then Michael Gallup is suddenly a number one wide receiver with Amari Cooper, CeeDee Lamb out. So, I mean, those are the first three guys I think at wideout that you're really looking at and saying, who do I need to play? Who do I want to play? Who do I want to fade? And how exactly am I mixing my exposures here?
Yeah, then it gets pretty gross after those three guys, which we can get into. I think I'm not going to play Michael Gallup. I think he's going to be a fade for me. I think I'm just going to go with this idea that Dallas is just going to do a lot of their damage on the ground on Thursday. And, if Dak throws for 280 and 3, I'll just get beat. I think Gallup, again, I don't want to guess at ownerships here. We'll see what FanShare says, but I think he might be the highest owned wide receiver on the slate. I like going down to Mooney instead. 16 targets last week, 47% target share. Allen Robinson, assuming he's not going to play, we'll find out for sure later today, but he has not practiced yet this week. So I just think Mooney's going to get good volume again against a bad Lions defense. Detroit, by the way, bad defending everything. They're 31st defending the deep ball, according to Football Outsiders. I think, Mooney could pop for a big play here. And that takes us to Marquise Goodwin, who at $3,800, I think he is a, flyer, low owned guy with a decent ceiling here. With Robinson out last week, Goodwin ran her out on 78% of the pass plays. He was that number 2 wide receiver behind Darnell Mooney and saw 8 targets, a 23.5% target share. Goodwin made a big play in that game, which he can do. He's still one of the faster wide receivers in the league. So if you're looking for a cheap, punt, low owned wide receiver, I think Goodwin is someone worth considering.
I think another guy that you wouldn't think would be a factor, but could be, is Josh Reynolds on this slate. He only saw 3 targets last week. That ranked 4th on the team, but he played 90% of the snaps in his first game with the Lions, led the wide receivers in that category, led TJ Hawkinson by a snap. So again, if we're talking a regular slate, this is all irrelevant and I don't care. But on this particular slate, all we need is Josh Reynolds to get 5 or 6 targets in this game, and he all of a sudden looks like a magical option down there.
Yeah, if you're gonna play a Lions wide receiver, I'd play Reynolds because he's what Amon-Ra St. Brown is 4,200. Where's Khalif? I can't even find Khalif. But, I think he's around 4,000 too. So just the savings you're getting on Josh Reynolds, where I think I think the other two guys have a slightly better chance to lead the Lions receivers in fantasy points, but I don't think it's enough to make up for the savings you're getting with Reynolds.
Yeah, every single Lions wideout is a total flyer. So why not take the cheapest ones? Just like you're playing defense in a lineup, just go for the cheapest one and see what happens. Cedric Wilson's cheap this week. I don't think he's, all that sneaky. It is worth noting that Vegas slot corner Nate Hobbs has graded well in PFF coverage. So it's not, maybe it's not a terrific matchup for Wilson, but he should be in good shape in terms of target outlook. Emmanuel Sanders, we talked about Stephon Diggs likely seeing a lot of Marshawn Lattimore. Emmanuel Sanders is probably facing rookie Paulson Adebo on the other side of that defense a lot. So there's some upside to Emmanuel Sanders this week. And we'll kind of see about Cole Beasley. He rebounded in playing time last week. So it seems like he's a better bet this week than he was last week, at least.
Yeah, Beasley's the other Bills wide receiver I'm interested in, I think, over Emmanuel Sanders this week. Like you said, Beasley, he was back up to 66% of the pass routes last week, so a decent number. That's kind of the area he's been in a lot of games this season with a healthy Dawson Knox. Maybe the rib injury is behind him now. And the Saints have struggled against slot wide receivers this season. Chris Godwin had a big game against them. Jacoby Myers caught 9 passes against them. Russell Gage caught 7 passes against New Orleans. So that is a spot they can be attacked. So for me, my Josh Allen teams are going to be stacked with Stephon Diggs and Cole Beasley. And on the other side of that game, I like Traquan Smith quite a bit. $4,400. He's emerged as the Saints' number 1 wide receiver, both in terms of volume and playing time. He's averaging 6.3 targets per game over the last 3 weeks with Trevor Siemian. And Traquan Smith's been playing in the slot quite a bit too, which is important against the Bills. That's going to keep him away from Trey White. So Smith's definitely my favorite Saints wide receiver play, and he would be the run back for me in your Josh Allen stacks.
Yeah, and I think I like $4,400 Traquan Smith better than $4,000 Tony Jones Jr. if we're talking flex decisions, just for the upside.
And probably a third of the ownership. So I agree for tournaments.
Tight end Darren Waller is the obvious big fish here, and tight end coverage has been a weakness for Dallas. So no matter how Derek Carr is playing, I don't think there's really a strong argument against using plenty of Darren Waller this week.
No, there's not. To me, the only argument against it is there are some other quality options at tight end. I really like Dalton Schultz, $5,300 on DraftKings, 92% of the pass routes last week, with those wide receiver injuries and issues that Dallas is dealing with. 8 targets in that game for Schultz and 19% target share. I mean, Schultz could lead Dallas in targets on Thursday. It would not surprise me at all. And the matchup's good. Vegas 26th in adjusted points allowed to tight ends, 27th in Football Outsiders tight end coverage, DVOA. So Schultz is my favorite play in Dallas's passing game tomorrow.
Yeah, my FFPC main event team is very happy about Dalton Schultz's matchup and situation this week. He's $100 more in salary than TJ Hawkinson on DraftKings now, $100 less than Hawk on FanDuel, basically tied with Hawkinson still in DK dollars per point in our projections this week. And Schultz is ahead of Hawkinson on FanDuel. So a good play. Like, if it was a month ago, maybe you have to go back further than that. But even I think a month ago, if you were like, Dalton Schultz costs the same as TJ Hawkinson now, I'd be like, that's silly. I'm going to take TJ Hawkinson there because he's going to get 12 targets. But I think they're basically the same player right now. And I'm not sure that Hawkinson remembers what the end zone looks like.
Yeah, that's my thing is I feel like Schultz has the higher ceiling just in the offense he's in. And honestly, their target projections are, I think, pretty similar this week with, assuming CD Lamb is out and we know Amari Cooper's out. I'm curious to see the ownership on Schultz and Hawkinson because I do think they're similar plays. If one's going to be way higher owned than the other, then I think it would make sense going to the other guy. But I think they'll end up pretty similar in ownership.
Yeah, that's what I would guess as well. Hawkinson still has the bigger name. Vegas is the 7th friendliest matchup to tight end scoring by our adjusted fantasy points allowed. And according to the Football Outsiders numbers, they are weak in both tight end and running back coverage relative to how they play receivers. I mean, you could play both tight ends from the Dallas Vegas matchup. There's room for Darren Waller and Dalton Schultz in lineups this week. Talked about that flex spot where I'm probably loath to play a third running back this time.
Yes, I plan on playing both those tight ends in at least one lineup. I think that's always a way to differentiate yourself. Not many people think to play 2 tight ends.
Is there anything worth saying about Dawson Knox and Nick Vannett?
No, I'm going to fade Dawson Knox. Coming off the big game in the best matchup actually against the Colts. The Colts are dead last in adjusted points allowed to tight ends. The Saints are a tough tight end defense, so I'm going to fade Dawson Knox. The cheap tight end I'm going to look to is Cole Kmet. Who's coming off a dud, which I like, suppresses the ownership, hopefully, on this slate. But he had averaged 6.3 targets over his previous 4 games. He also he caught 5 balls on 7 targets back in week 1 in Andy Dalton's only full game of the season. So, there's some rapport there. And the Lions are 20th in Football Outsiders tight end coverage rankings. I think, Kmet is a decent bet in this matchup at that price tag.
Yeah, I agree with fading Knox relative to the other guys here and mixing Cole Kmet in as well. On to defense. The Bills and Cowboys are the best defenses playing. Talked about the numbers and the recent numbers in particular for the Cowboys. So they're the best defenses and nobody is really priced out of consideration here. So I would look to those 2 first and probably Dallas more than Buffalo, but it's tough for me to say that one has more upside than the other.
Yeah, Buffalo is our top projected defense among these 6. They check in as the best value on FanDuel. They're the 2nd best value on DraftKings. They're the D I would look to first. I'm curious to see ownership on these defenses. I think it's always worth playing lower owned defenses. I even think the Saints are interesting as a tournament play, again, especially if Spencer Brown is out. We've seen Buffalo struggle. Saints have some talent on defense. They're at home. So that's kind of the lower owned defense I would look to if you're making a lineup, without many Bills in it.
Yeah, I agree. I'm curious to see those numbers Thursday morning too, for just that reason. Otherwise, I don't think I'm really heavily targeting any other cheaper defense. It's really, usually you'd be looking cheap so that you can save the salary space. That's just not the case usually in a short slate like this. So I think Vegas is probably the least interesting. I think that's the one defense I would not play, because if I did need to go all the way down to 2,400 for a lineup, I'd play the Lions against Andy Dalton instead of the Raiders at Dallas.
Yeah, I was gonna say, if you want to get super sneaky, if you're in a big field tournament, I think fading David Montgomery and then playing the Lions defense, you could do that, and then you can make the rest of your lineup as chalky as you want. I think you're going to be differentiated enough.
I mean, you could play David Montgomery and the Lions defense on a short slate, because we could get 100 and a touchdown from Montgomery and still get 2-3 turnovers from Dalton.
True.
That'll do it for this special Thanksgiving episode of the DFS podcast. Head over to draftsharks.com now. You can see our full player rankings for week 12 and get some help with your DFS lineups in our lineup generator. You can also bring your questions for us and the rest of the Draft Sharks community to the free Draft Sharks Discord. You can find the link to join that in the description for this podcast. For Jared Smola and the rest of the Draft Sharks crew, I'm Matt Schaff saying thanks so much for swimming with us.